Welcome back to the Sense Check Lab, where we put today's lifestyle trends under the microscope and fact-check the common sense with scientific researches. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into something many of us, well, take for granted in our kitchens: frozen foods. There's a lot of talk out there, a lot of assumptions about whether fresh is always best. So what's our mission today?
What's fascinating here is that we often operate on these long-held beliefs without really questioning the science. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the common myths surrounding frozen foods, especially fruits and vegetables, by examining recent researches. We want to see how they stack up against their fresh counterparts in terms of nutrition and safety, and maybe understand why these perceptions persist. This raises an important question. Are we truly making the most informed choices when we navigate the freezer aisle?
Okay, let's unpack this. Our big question for this deep dive is, are fresh fruits and vegetables truly more nutritious than frozen ones, or are we clinging to outdated notions? And beyond nutrition, what are the safety and quality considerations we should be aware of when it comes to frozen produce? Many of us automatically assume that fresh is always best, right? It's almost ingrained. We often view frozen produce simply as a convenience, or perhaps even something with a bit of a stigma. But let's set the stage. The researchers tell us that despite dietary guidelines like the 2015-20 USDA Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which advises increasing fruit and vegetable intake, suggesting half of your plate should be produce, a significant portion of the population isn't hitting those targets.
Indeed. A 2013 report from the CDC indicated that about 33% of American adults consume less than one serving of fruits and vegetables a day. If we connect this to the bigger picture, dietary guidelines advise consuming more than 400 grams per day of fruits and vegetables. That's to reduce the risk of many chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and various cancers. The disparity between these recommendations and actual consumption patterns is, well, it's a subject of ongoing investigation. One documented reason for this inadequate consumption is the limited availability of high-quality fresh produce, often due to spoilage and losses during transportation and storage. This issue is particularly pronounced during winter months when quality might diminish and costs can be higher.
So even if we buy fresh, it might not be as fresh as we think by the time it reaches our plates. Is that what you're saying?
Precisely, yeah. Fresh produce is often picked before it reaches peak ripeness. Then it undergoes this journey of packaging, storage, and transportation, which can take anywhere from 3 days to, believe it or not, even 12 months for some types. After it arrives at the supermarket, it might sit on display for another 1 to 3 days and then be stored in your home for up to 7 days before consumption. During this time, it's losing moisture, it's at risk of spoiling, and it's undergoing various degradations like enzymatic processes, cellular respiration, oxidation, especially when exposed to light or oxygen. This negatively affects its nutritional benefit.
That's really interesting. Quite a long journey. So what about frozen then? How does that process work differently?
Frozen produce has a fascinating history, actually. Clarence Birdseye, he was inspired by how Inuit people preserved fish by freezing them quickly, and he developed the flash freezing process. This technique rapidly freezes produce at cryogenic temperatures, which minimizes the size of ice crystals formed. These smaller crystals are crucial because they preserve the cell membranes, which ensures the proper texture, maximum flavor, and color when the food is eventually thawed. This method significantly reduces processing and storage times compared to fresh produce, protecting sensory and nutritional qualities over longer periods. It's generally regarded as superior to canning or dehydration for preserving quality. As a side note, commercial mechanical refrigeration became both affordable and popular in the early 1950s, leading to a steady increase in frozen vegetable sales, though more recent reports have shown some decline due to economic factors and consumer habits.
Okay, and some key terms we'll likely be hearing today, just so we're all on the same page.
Absolutely. We'll be discussing the sell-by date, which is, for retailers, really not an indicator of food safety. Food can be safely frozen and eaten past this date, though it might not be at peak freshness, texture-wise. We'll also touch on blanching, which is a mild heat treatment, often with steam or hot water, applied to vegetables before freezing. It inactivates enzymes that cause deterioration and reduces microbial loads, though, yes, it can lead to some loss of water-soluble vitamins.
Okay, got it. So our working hypothesis, a big assumption we're looking into today, is that fresh foods are generally more nutritious than frozen ones. And we're also exploring the idea that frozen food expires or kills bacteria, those common beliefs.
Exactly. Our main objective, based on the specific researches provided by the Frozen Food Foundation, is to meticulously analyze the nutrient content, specifically vitamin C, trans-carotene, which is provitamin A, and folate in a selection of commonly consumed fresh, stored, and frozen fruits and vegetables. We also aim to fact-check these widely held beliefs about the safety and shelf life of frozen foods. This investigation wasn't random, by the way. The choice of produce and nutrients was predetermined by their consumption patterns in the U.S. and their nutritional importance.
Right. How did the researchers investigate these important questions then? What was their approach? What methods did they use?
Well, the core of our deep dive today comes from a comprehensive study conducted by researchers from the University of Georgia, among others. They purchased a selection of common fruits and vegetables: blueberries, strawberries, broccoli, cauliflower, corn, green beans, spinach, and green peas from 6 major U.S. supermarket chains. These were all within a 40-kilometer, so about 25 miles, radius of Athens, Georgia. Both fresh and private label frozen options were acquired.
And they tried to mimic real-world consumer habits, right? Like
Yeah.
how we'd store things at home.
Exactly. That's a key point. To simulate how consumers typically store produce, half of the fresh fruits and vegetables purchased were stored in a standard kitchen refrigerator at 4 degrees Celsius, which is about 39.2 degrees Fahrenheit, for 5 days before being analyzed. These are referred to as fresh stored samples. The other half was analyzed immediately as fresh.
Okay, and what about preparing them for the actual analysis? Did they just, chop them up?
Not at all. It was quite rigorous. For each analysis period, approximately 200 grams, so about 7 ounces, of produce from each store were combined to create a composite sample. This composite was then ground just before the nutrient analysis. A crucial step, especially for vegetables, is blanching. For the L-ascorbic acid, that's vitamin C, and folate analyses, fresh stored corn on the cob were blanched for 1 minute in boiling water, then rapidly chilled in an ice bath to stop enzymatic degradation. Other fresh stored vegetables were immediately placed in a nutrient-stabilizing region. And importantly, all the frozen vegetables had already been blanched by the industry prior to freezing. That's standard practice. For trans-carotene analyses, all fresh stored vegetables were blanched as well.
Okay, and the actual testing for the nutrients themselves, how was that done?
They used established scientific methods. Vitamin C, or L-ascorbic acid, was measured using a titration method. For trans-carotene, they followed European standard methods EN 128231 and MANUS2, which involved a step called saponification, then extraction, and finally high-performance liquid chromatography, or HPLC for analysis. Very precise. And for total folate, they employed a trienzyme extraction method using specific enzymes like alpha amylase and chicken pancreas conjugase, followed by a microbiological assay. Folate, by the way, is light sensitive, so these assays were conducted under special yellow lights.
Wow, this sounds like a really robust approach. Very detailed. How long did this research actually take?
The analyses spanned 2 years, conducted across 6 distinct timeframes, like summer to fall and winter to spring for both years. This allowed for comprehensive data collection and statistical analysis using tools like ANOVA and Tukey's studentized range test to identify significant differences. They also performed rigorous quality control checks, demonstrating excellent recoveries of the vitamins, ranging from 97% to 105% for vitamin C, 90.7% and 99.8% for trans-carotene, and 92% to 108% for folate. This really validates the accuracy and repeatability of their methods.
So after all that rigorous testing, what did the researchers actually show? Does fresh really outperform frozen? Was the hypothesis correct?
This is where it gets really interesting. Contrary to popular belief, multiple studies, including a 2017 study and a 2015 study cited in the researches, found no significant differences in vitamin content between fresh and frozen produce for many items. We're talking broccoli, cauliflower, corn, green beans, green peas, spinach, blueberries, and strawberries. In fact, frozen corn and green beans were even found to have higher vitamin C levels than their fresh counterparts. The authors attributed this to quicker degradation in the fresh vegetables during that storage and transport time we talked about. Overall, the vitamin content in frozen vegetables was comparable and sometimes even higher than fresh, especially when fresh produce had been stored for several days in the refrigerator. Vitamins A, carotenoids, vitamin E, minerals, and fiber levels were generally similar across both categories and largely unaffected by blanching.
That is surprising. Okay, let's dive into some specifics. How did vitamin C fare across the board?
Yeah, the researchers revealed some clear patterns there. While fresh samples typically started with higher vitamin C than those stored fresh, the frozen options often retained more over time. For instance, fresh strawberry stored at 4 degrees Celsius, that's 39.2 Fahrenheit, for 5 days showed a 12.5% decrease in L-ascorbic acid. However, frozen blueberries and strawberries actually had a greater mean vitamin C content compared to their fresh stored counterparts. Frozen strawberries were statistically significantly higher than both fresh and fresh stored.
Wow.
For broccoli, cauliflower, and corn, there was no statistically significant difference in L-ascorbic acid content across fresh stored, and frozen forms. Interestingly, frozen green beans had significantly higher vitamin C than both fresh and fresh stored. Similarly, frozen green peas and spinach were statistically significantly higher in vitamin C than their fresh stored versions and comparable to the initial fresh levels.
Okay, what about provitamin A or transvacarotene? Did we see similar patterns?
For transgarotene, some degradation was noted in fresh berry fruits after harvest, as you might expect. With broccoli, there wasn't a significant difference between fresh and fresh stored, but interestingly, frozen broccoli actually had lower statistically different levels compared to its fresh counterparts in these analyses. That was one outlier.
Huh.
Green beans, when stored fresh at 4 degrees C for 5 days, saw a 23% decrease in transgarotene. Spinach, notably, contained the highest content of transgarotene overall. The values were 11,100 for fresh, 7,200 for fresh stored, and 7,900 micrograms per 100 grams fresh weight for frozen. So I drop in fresh stored, but frozen held up better. For green peas, both fresh and frozen contents were significantly greater than fresh stored. The fresh stored was 36% lower than fresh and 44% lower than frozen.
And folate. That's such a crucial nutrient, especially during pregnancy.
Yeah.
How did that compare?
Right, folate is very important. In strawberries, the mean folate content was around 43 micrograms per 100 grams. Pretty consistent. For green beans, the folate content in fresh was similar to USDA database values, but the frozen value in this research was actually twice that of fresh.
Twice? Really?
Yes. Fresh green beans stored for 5 days saw an 18% decrease in folate, and the frozen option was statistically different from fresh. Spinach, again, came out on top with the highest folate content among all the produce examined. Fresh stored spinach experienced a significant 37% decrease after 5 days, but the high retention of folate in frozen storage seemed to compensate for this loss compared to fresh stored.
So it really seems like frozen can often hold its own nutritionally and sometimes even surpass fresh produce after that typical storage period. But let's switch gears slightly. Right about the common safety concerns like expiration dates and bacteria.
These are critical points, and there's a lot of misunderstanding here. First, regarding expiry, foodsafety.gov clearly states that frozen food stored continuously at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, that's minus 18 degrees Celsius, or below can be kept indefinitely from a safety perspective. The guidelines you see on packaging primarily indicate when the food will be at peak quality. Texture and flavor can deteriorate over long periods, sure, but it doesn't mean the food becomes unsafe.
Okay, so indefinitely safe if kept frozen properly. What about bacteria then? Does freezing kill them?
No, and this is crucial, freezing food does not kill bacteria. Instead, temperatures below minus 18 Celsius inactivate any microbes present bacteria, yeasts, molds. They essentially go dormant. However, once you thaw the food, that same bacteria can become active again and multiply rapidly, especially if the food sits in the danger zone between 4 degrees Celsius and 60 degrees Celsius, or 40 and 140 Fahrenheit. So proper thawing and cooking are absolutely essential, whether it was fresh or frozen to begin with.
Right, good food safety practices always apply. And what about practical things like packaging and cost? Are frozen options generally better value?
Good questions. On packaging, it's often recommended not to freeze food long-term in its original store packaging, as it might not be airtight enough and can lead to freezer burn. Repackaging helps maintain quality. When you're buying frozen, look for packaging that's intact, free of large ice crystals or signs of freezer burn inside. Those can indicate temperature fluctuations, which aren't ideal for quality. From a cost perspective, yes, frozen produce can be significantly cheaper than fresh, especially for out-of-season items. Think berries in winter. For example, some research has found an average price difference of about $11, maybe 10.2 euros per kilogram, between the cheapest and most expensive fresh, frozen, or tinned options. Some differences are dramatic. Passion fruit, for instance. Fresh cost over 83 USD, about 77 euros per kilogram, while frozen pulp was around 19 USD or 17.6 euros per kilogram. Tin was even less, though often in syrup.
Wow, huge difference there.
Yeah. Broccoli had a smaller difference, with fresh being only about 48 cents, or 0.45 euros per kilogram cheaper than frozen in that comparison. Frozen family meals, too, ranging from maybe 4 to 10 USD, so 3.7 to 9.3 euros, can be more economical than takeout. Just a note on tinned or canned goods. Be aware that syrups add sugars and brines add sodium. The Cleveland Clinic, for example, recommends selecting frozen entrees with less than 600 milligrams of sodium, and generally a shorter ingredient list means less processing.
Okay, so putting all these findings together, what does this actually mean for us, the consumers? How should we interpret this?
Well, the overall picture clearly challenges that widespread belief that fresh produce is always nutritionally superior. Always. Our deep dive into these researches suggests that frozen fruits and vegetables, particularly when you factor in the typical consumer storage of fresh produce, often retain comparable or even higher nutrient levels. This is largely because they are flash frozen right at peak ripeness, which locks in those vital vitamins and minerals before significant degradation can occur during that long journey of transport and home storage we discussed.
So that journey from farm to fork really, really impacts the fresh nutrient content we actually consume. And the freezing process itself isn't the nutrient destroyer some people might think. It's more about preserving what's there.
Correct, exactly. While that initial blanching step for some vegetables can lead to minor losses of water-soluble vitamins like vitamin C and some antioxidants, the subsequent quick freezing process itself largely stabilizes the nutrient content. The benefits of flash freezing often outweigh these initial, relatively small losses, especially when you compare it to the gradual, continuous nutrient degradation happening in fresh produce over days or even weeks of storage. It just highlights that fresh right out of the ground is one thing, but fresh after sitting in a warehouse, on a truck, on a shelf, and then in your fridge for 5 days. That's a different nutritional story.
Right. And on the safety side, just to reiterate, freezing isn't a magic bullet against bacteria. It doesn't sterilize, but also doesn't make food inherently unsafe either.
Exactly. That's the key distinction. Freezing is a preservation method.
Oh.
It inactivates bacteria, puts them on pause, prevents their growth while frozen. It's not a sterilization technique that kills them. So this means proper thawing practices like in the fridge, not on the counter, and subsequent cooking or reheating to safe internal temperatures are crucial. It just reinforces the importance of safe food handling, regardless of whether your starting ingredient was fresh or frozen.
Okay. And how does this connect to the broader conversation we often have about highly processed foods versus whole foods? Where do frozen veggies fit in?
That's a great point. This leads us to an important distinction. While some frozen foods, like, say, highly processed frozen meals or pizzas, can definitely contain high levels of added sodium, sugar, and unhealthy fats, many frozen fruits and vegetables are what we'd call minimally processed. The research has really underscored the importance of reading labels here. If you're buying a bag of frozen spinach, for example, the best choice is usually the one where the ingredient list just says spinach. Maybe water for block freezing, but no added salt, sugar, or sauces. This makes minimally processed frozen produce a really convenient, often more economical, and nutritionally sound choice. They can play a vital role in helping you meet those daily fruit and vegetable intake recommendations, and they also significantly help in reducing food waste in the home simply because they last so much longer than fresh.
That's a huge benefit too, the food waste aspect. Okay, so we've established frozen foods are often a fantastic choice. But like any research, there are always caveats, limitations, right? What should we keep in mind about these studies?
This raises an important question, absolutely. The researches we've discussed, while comprehensive, did have some inherent limitations, naturally. For instance, the study didn't track specific cultivar types of the fruits and vegetables, different varieties of strawberries might vary, nor did it track their specific country or even U.S. state of origin, or the specific environmental and weather patterns during growth, which could all influence nutrient content. The primary goal was really to compare produce based on typical grocery purchasing habits, mimicking the consumer experience, rather than controlling for all those deeper agricultural factors.
Right, focusing on the end product we actually buy. What about the methods themselves? Any practical considerations there?
Well, yes. While rigorous, there were some practical points. For the blanching step, which is necessary to inactivate those enzymes in fresh produce before analysis, the researchers didn't have access to an industrial-scale steam system that mimics large food processing operations. So they used boiling water for the fresh and fresh-stored corn, for example. This method can potentially lead to slightly higher losses of water-soluble vitamins compared to steam blanching, though they tried to minimize it. Also, some variability in nutrient content, like the L-ascorbic acid in frozen blueberries, was observed occasionally, which could potentially be due to variations in non-uniform blast freezing at the industrial level. Minor inconsistencies.
Okay, makes sense. And beyond the specific studies, what are other wider factors that might influence our perceptions, maybe even our choices, when it comes to frozen food?
That's a really important aspect. There's actually a documented negative association with frozen compared to fresh vegetables among many consumers. It's almost a gut feeling for some. This is often driven by, well, decades of marketing promoting freshness and also just our dietary conditioning. What we're used to, what we're told is best. Also, additives like flavorings, salt, and sugar in some highly processed foods, including some frozen meals, can unfortunately have addictive qualities. This can make it harder for people to switch to or prefer more natural options, even minimally processed frozen ones without those additives. As Dr. Michael Garcia from UCLA Health notes in related commentary, our brains interpret certain intense tastes as good, leading to cravings that get reinforced by advertising. It's about breaking those learned habits and taste preferences sometimes.
So the perception that fresh is better often overrides the scientific evidence we've just discussed, simply because of marketing history and maybe those learned taste preferences.
Exactly. It's a powerful psychological factor, a key consideration that you, as a consumer, need to be aware of when making choices. Also, just practically, while frozen produce is generally excellent quality, it's still vital to check labels and packaging. Look for signs of freezer burn or lots of ice crystals, indicators of poor handling or temperature fluctuations, which can impact texture and potentially nutrients over time. And as we mentioned with tinned or canned produce, always be mindful of added syrups or brines that bump up the sugar or sodium content unnecessarily.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive into frozen foods? What's the main message we should remember next time we're in the supermarket freezer aisle?
The summary is pretty clear, I think. Frozen fruits and vegetables are a nutritionally sound, highly convenient, and often more cost-effective alternative to fresh produce, especially when you realistically consider how long fresh produce is typically stored from farm to table, and then often for days in your own home. They offer comparable, and in several cases based on these researches, sometimes even superior, nutrient levels for key vitamins like C and folate after typical storage periods. This makes them a powerful tool for you, the consumer, to increase your fruit and vegetable intake, move towards healthier dietary patterns, aligning with global and national health guidelines, and reduce food waste.
That's very clear. So what are some practical steps or recommendations we can take away based on these researches?
Great question. Let's list a few key things. First, and perhaps most importantly, don't automatically dismiss frozen produce as nutritionally inferior. It's a very reliable option that often locks in nutrients extremely effectively. Second, always check labels, whether it's frozen or tinned. For frozen entrees, maybe aim for less than 600 milligrams of sodium as a benchmark. For plain frozen fruits and vegetables, look for no added sugars, low sodium, and minimal preservatives. A shorter ingredient list is almost always a good sign.
Good rule of thumb.
Third, remember that crucial safety point. Freezing inactivates bacteria, but doesn't kill them. So always thaw foods properly, preferably in the fridge, and reheat or cook them thoroughly to safe internal temperatures. Fourth, for optimal quality, especially if you buy in bulk or plan to store things long term, consider repackaging foods from their original store packaging into airtight freezer bags or containers to prevent freezer burn. Fifth, think about buying out-of-season produce frozen to save money. It's often significantly cheaper and, as we've seen, just as nutritious, if not more so, than fresh versions shipped long distances. And finally, perhaps the broadest recommendation. To truly shift towards a healthier diet overall, focus on preparing and cooking your own meals at home more often, using natural and minimally processed ingredients, whether they start fresh or frozen, without additives. This really empowers you to control what goes into your body, especially considering things like saturated fat and added sugar, aiming for less than 10% of total calorie intake for each, and sodium, trying to limit it to around 2,300 milligrams per day, which is about 1 teaspoon of salt.
Excellent. Very practical advice. So, as we finish up, what's a final thought we should be mulling over after this deep dive? Something to ponder.
I think this raises an important question for all of us. In a world where convenience often seems to clash with our nutritional goals, how can we really leverage the scientific understanding of food preservation, like freezing, to make consistently healthier, more economical, and crucially, less wasteful food choices? How can we challenge our own ingrained habits and perhaps outdated perceptions about what fresh truly means in the context of our modern food system? It's certainly something to consider as you navigate your next grocery trip.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Sense Check Lab. We hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating world of frozen foods with us. If you found this deep dive helpful or interesting, please subscribe to our show so you never miss an update. Don't forget to share this deep dive with your friends and family and leave us a comment with your thoughts or suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover next. Your support and feedback help us keep bringing you the science behind the trends. Until next time, stay curious and stay well.